Let's talk about this new movie. It's the sequel to the really successful film, Stephen King film adaptation of the movie It. There's a sequel, It Chapter 2. We knew it was coming a couple years ago. When I reviewed the one 2 years ago, you know, I went back and looked at my review last night, and I just gave it so many positives and so many pluses. It was a solid film. I gave it a solid A. That was the original.
Yeah.
You know, 2 years later, you know, they're coming out with another one, and it's looking at these teenagers who we saw in the first, but you're looking at the adults they became. And they're having to go back to Derry, Maine to revisit the crazy, goofy, freaky clown, Pennywise, because Pennywise is back causing trouble again. So in this film, you're seeing the adults, and you're seeing flashbacks to when they were teens, and you're seeing some things you maybe didn't see the first go around. I got a chance to interview the cinematographer, talk a little bit about that in a minute, but what else do you want to share about the story, Thomas, for It Chapter 2?
Well, I think just looking at the casting choices, it was absolutely top notch. You could look at the older adults and be like, okay, I can believe that these were the kids 27 years later. You know, you got Hader, you got McAvoy, Chastain, then you've got Isaiah Mustafa, Jay Ryan, James Ransone, and Andy Bean.
Yeah, and they all worked.
Yeah.
I mean, you really felt like you were watching the grown-up versions of the kids. So I thought casting was spot on.
Yeah, and all the performances all the way around were perfect. And like you were talking about the cinematography, Checo
Baresi.
Okay, yes, yeah, he was just a really good job developing the kind of creepy atmosphere.
Chico Marx. What did you say? Chico.
Yeah, it was Checo Baresi. He was the cinematographer for this.
Yeah, just kind of developing the creepy atmosphere. He did a fantastic job with that. And but honestly, that's where my positives kind of drop off. I mean, yeah, the sound design, the music from Benjamin Wallfish, all of that. But there were some problems with this film that.
Yeah. Andy Muschietti and his producing partner, his sister Barbara, they teamed up again. They did the original. So they were back again producing this one and involved in directing this one. The first one I thought was really, it had that creep factor, that eerie factor that, you know, it showed you enough of Pennywise to be just freaked out, but it wasn't Pennywise in your face all the time. This time I felt it was almost like when we see Jaws. You know, sometimes you're more freaked out when you don't.
What you don't see.
When you don't see him.
What you do.
And to me, there was too much of Pennywise. And almost like Freddy Krueger, after a while, when you see Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Streets, it just became kind of a laughing joke. It didn't really scare you much anymore.
Yeah, when you kind of take away that mystery, that unknown factor, and try to explain a lot about, you know, they tried to dig into Pennywise's origins and stuff, and that is from the source material from Stephen King's 1,000-page book. But they just kind of threw that in there in this chapter. In the first chapter, they didn't really hint much at that at all, and then they tried to explain his entire origins in this, and it just felt like they were throwing stuff at a wall just to see what stuck.
The movie was long. It was almost 3 hours long. Very long film. You know, the first one was what, an hour 45?
It was actually 2:15.
Was it really?
But it flew by, I felt like.
Yeah, I did too. The first one just didn't feel long. This one did.
It's tough to adapt a book anyway, particularly a long book like that. The Harry Potter books were miracles as far as film adaptations go, I think, in so many ways.
But it can be done.
With the exception of Goblet of Fire, I think. But anyway, the idea is that did they pare down too much, not enough? Did they pare down the wrong stuff?
To me, they were trying to do too much. I felt that
should have been a three-parter.
We've talked about that. You know, could this have been a three-part? Could it have been a trilogy? And I think maybe they could have found a way to have done that. And the pacing just was all over the place for me. And another thing that bothered me, initially it worked. You know, you would have the adult versions, then it would, you know, transition with the kind of flashbacks. And they did some creative things where you would see, you know, a character from the past drive by on a bike, and then it would pan to a kind of a live action. I mean, and you know,
the present day version.
Present day version. Thank you. It wasn't animated, and you know that worked. So some of the transitions worked, but after a while, it was almost like I was watching a ping pong match. And I don't think that was balanced well enough for me. And I think because there was so much they were trying to do and trying to tell you, it was just overinflated. Like one of those red balloons that you just wish would pop, you know, and never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and the climax just drug on for way too long. It was probably like 45 minutes. There's this, final battle against Pennywise, and it just grows into just cacophony,
Yep.
and it's just background noise, and it's just like they keep coming up with new excuses to have another scare, but it's not really a new scare. It's just the same thing.
And that's the thing. The scares, some of the jump scares work. I mean, you expect jump scares in a horror film.
Sure.
But there were so many things that I saw in this movie that I've seen in other movies or other stories. And of course, it's Stephen King, so he was kind of the the father, the modern day father of those kinds of things. But I think you got to find a way to make something like this fresh and unique, and you can do that, but they just didn't pull it off in this one. So for me, the first one was an A, this one's a C+.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on both accounts. So, I mean, it's really admirable effort that they would try to adapt something this grand and massive. And the first chapter I loved. It was nearly a horror masterpiece, but this one just dropped off for me.
It did. I just kind of walked away going, I'm not going to watch it 7 more times.